Hello, welcome to the second in the Prendos Property Talks seminar series. Today I'm going to talk to you about long-term maintenance plans. My name is Ollie Cottam and I'm an Associate Building Surveyor at Prendos. I joined the company back in September 2022, so I've been here for a short period, but prior to that I've got 15 years experience as a Chartered Building Surveyor, working in the UK with CBRE and Deloitte before that. Over the course of my career I've conducted a large number of long-term maintenance plan surveys for a huge range of clients on an equally huge range of properties. This ranges from central government through Ministry of Justice, commercial buildings offices, industrial units, education facilities, student halls of residence and multi-unit residential accommodation. One thing I noticed very early on in my career was that long-term maintenance plans were often very difficult for clients to understand and interpret. I'd get frustrated at spending my time and clients' money producing these reports, but then the client was unable to do anything with them because ultimately the output of the report said they needed more money than they could afford to maintain their building. So it's been a feature of my career over the last 15 years where I've been trying to help my clients to actually make sense of the information we're giving them. And this culminated in me being involved with the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, which is my governing body. They're a global institution for building surveyors. And I worked with them as the chair of a working group, which put together the document on the screen, which is the Plan Preventative Maintenance Guidance Note, which is another term for long-term maintenance plans. And clearly this was a source of pride in my career. But was also very important in guiding the industry in making these documents useful for clients. And we provide guidance for surveyors as they're producing them to make sure that they deliver and ultimately help with the maintenance of buildings. Okay, in terms of our agenda for today, I'm going to start off by explaining what a long-term maintenance plan is, and I'll use the term LTMP because it's quicker and easier to say. Also talk about the Unit Titles Act, which is the reason why we do LTMPs in New Zealand. And then talk about some of the common maintenance strategies, what the key elements are of a long-term maintenance plan, and finally talk about how we at Prendos add value. Obviously, if you're watching this and you've got any questions for us, please do get in contact direct. I'll be happy to talk through any questions you've got or any comments you want to make. So what is a long-term maintenance plan? So broadly, it sets out how someone should maintain their property, keeping it in repair over a given period of time. And for LTMPs, for body corporates, that's somewhere between 10 and 30 years. The document itself is based on this spreadsheet, which basically looks at the building on an element by element basis. And by element, I mean breaking a building down into its main components. So that will be the roof, the elevations, the joinery, internal common parts for body corporates, those kind of things. As you can see on the screen, these are listed out in a spreadsheet with each element taking up a row on the spreadsheet itself. So what we'll do is we'll describe the element and explain what kind of condition we found it in, and then we'll give it a condition category, which is A to D, with A being good, D being poor. And then we'll also outline what works we think will need to be done over the period. And that will normally cover works that need to be done in the short term to maybe bring something into repair, or what we expect will need to be done over the period of the report to keep it in repair. And then each item of work that's listed on there gets given a cost. And that cost goes in the year in which we think it's going to be needed to take place. So in this side of the report, you get a cost in the columns, which adds up at the bottom to give you a total expenditure for that year for all of the works that we are advising will need to be required. So that's the key component of a long-term maintenance plan. It's what works we think as registered or chartered surveyors and are going to need to be undertaken over the period of time to put and keep your property in repair. All of that then can get fed into your budgets and levy setting to enable you to undertake those works. So we're also going to talk about the Unit Titles Act. As I said at the start of the presentation, I've only been in New Zealand since September last year, so I'm not going to profess to be an expert in the Unit Titles Act, and I'm sure that the people I'm talking to here are much more familiar with it than I am. So just touching on the key clauses that apply to long-term maintenance plans. The Unit Titles Act 2010 sets out the main requirements. So at section 116 we have a body corporate must establish and regularly maintain a long-term maintenance plan, and then at section 117 it says that the body corporate must maintain a long-term maintenance fund. And then last year the snappily titled unit titled Strengthening Body Corporate Governance and Other Matters Amendment Act 2022 was enacted. The majority of that amendment comes into play on the 9th of May, so may well be live by the time you watch this. And that added some additional requirements for long-term maintenance plans for larger developments, which is defined as anything with more than 10 units within it. So in that case, the long-term maintenance plan is required to last for 30 years instead of 10 years. And it must also be reviewed by a professional every 3 years. So to summarise there, in terms of legislative requirements for an LTMP, body corporates must have a long-term maintenance plan. They must keep a long-term maintenance fund. However, there is actually no requirement for them to act upon either of those. And then for larger developments of more than 10 units, the plan must last for 30 years, and for 10 years for the smaller developments. And then finally, larger developments must review their plans every 3 years. So just to drill down into a bit of detail there's two bits I want to talk about. First of all is the 10-year versus 30 years. And the question is why is it different for larger developments? So in terms of the RICS guidance note that I put together that I mentioned at the start, the guidance in that one actually is for maintenance plans to be around 10 years. So having a 30-year plan actually kind of goes against my professional understanding as a building surveyor. The reason for this is because we are building surveyors and we're not fortune tellers. So forecasting works that are going to be required in 30 years' time isn't an exact art. It's not an exact science either. So there is potential for failure in that. But there is sense to making large developments plan for 30 years. And this all comes from the New Zealand Building Code and section B2 durability. In that, each building element has to fit a certain section to outline how long that building element must last as a minimum before it needs to be repaired or replaced. There are 3 categories. First off is anything structural or anything that's hard to replace or hidden within the building, and they must last for a minimum of 50 years. Second category is anything that's relating to the building envelope, so weather tightness, and then anything that's moderately difficult to replace. And finally, that needs to last for 15 years. And finally, there's any building elements that are easy to replace, and they must last for a minimum of 5 years. And that's things like decorations. So the key one there is the second one, that is the 15-year minimum for building envelope and anything that's moderately easy to replace. So a 30-year plan, the intention with that is that it would last for 2 cycles of the minimum 15 years. And there's a lot of sense in doing that, because if you are budgeting for that over a long period, it reduces the risk of you having a situation where you don't have sufficient funds if one of those elements fails and needs to be replaced. So like I say, it goes against the guidance because it's very hard for surveyors to plan or to advise whether something's going to fail in 30 years. So what we tend to do there is we base our advice on typical life expectancies for the products and the building elements in question, which gives a certain guidance and allows for the budgeting to take place. Now, the second requirement that came in the Amendment Act was the 3 yearly reviews, and that actually supports the 30-year cycle. As I said, it's difficult for us to plan for 30 years, so the 3-year review thing focuses on those first 3 years of the schedule, which means every 3 years you are looking at those subsequent 3 years, and you can adjust the schedule to reflect the changing condition of the building. You can adjust the schedule to affect the budget and the levy requirements, which means that even though we're forecasting 30 years in the future, which carries it with a large amount of uncertainty, because we're looking every 3 years, we're drilling down on those and making sure those 3 years are accurate. So there is sense in the Amendment Act. It does work for body corporates. So I'm going to talk through a couple of the 2 key maintenance strategies and how they apply to LTMPs and what the pros and cons of those are. So maintenance strategies can be split into 2 key types, reactive and proactive. A reactive maintenance strategy is the default. Basically, it means that if a building element fails, you repair it. And that's the equivalent of having a roof leak and chucking some silicone paint on it to block the leak and then moving on. And the obvious benefits of a reactive strategy is that generally it's pretty low cost because you're not planning anything, so you're not taking money off people for works that aren't happening. You're just spending on the minimum cost for the repair, and once the repair's done, you move on. However, there comes a big risk, because if you have a roof and you keep chucking paint on to fill your holes and stop your leaks, eventually that roof is going to fail to the point where you can't keep repairing it and you have to replace it. And if you're on a reactive maintenance strategy, there'll be no money available for that. So suddenly everyone's scrambling around getting emergency funds in from the body corporate, which no one likes and causes a lot of problems for everyone. So the proactive strategy is what we're talking about here, the long-term maintenance plan, and that is considering the age and condition of your building elements and putting in a strategy for replacing them before they fail. Now, as I said with the reactive one, a proactive one can seem higher cost because you're asking people to pay money for things that might be happening in the future. But it means that when those things happen, you know they're going to happen and you get a lot of benefits for doing so, and it causes people a lot less hassle. So in terms of benefits for a proactive strategy, first of all is setting the levy. On a year-by-year basis, as I said, reactive strategy will have a lower levy generally, but by having a consistent levy that everyone knows about in advance, makes it a lot easier for people who currently own property, and it also makes it easier for when you come to sell them, because a purchaser is going to know what the levy for maintenance is going to be at for the next up to 30 years potentially. It means that you avoid spikes in expenditure as well, so you don't have that replacement of a roof, say, when you weren't expecting it. So when you do come to replace your roof, there should be funds in the account, in the fund, ready to be spent on that new roof. Second benefit is works cost. If anyone's ever tried to get some construction works done urgently, you will find that you will pay more for it. So if you've got an emergency replacement of, say, a heat pump, because yours has failed and you weren't expecting it, it's going to cost you more because you have to get trades in urgently, which they'll charge you more for. You might have to pay out of hours costs. You have to source whatever you can. You can't wait to get the product that you want. You might have to buy a more expensive one because you need it urgently. Planned maintenance means that you know, right, in 3 years' time, I'm replacing all of my air conditioning, so I can plan to do that work at a certain time and manage my costs in doing so. It's a clear benefit and generally saves money over time. Next one is programming. Building elements fail when you need them most. Your roof will fail when it's raining, obviously, because that's when you see the leak. Your air conditioning will fail when it's hot outside because you're running your air conditioning. So that is the worst time for the element to fail and for you to do the works. So having a long-term maintenance plan means that you know you're going to replace your roof in 3 years' time, and we're going to replace our roof in the summer. That means you've got less likelihood of leaks affecting or rainwater affecting your building while you're doing the work, and it generally makes it cheaper as well because you're not having to do quite so much in terms of temporary protection. Environmental considerations as well. These are becoming more and more important in New Zealand, and we encourage our clients to consider these on all of the work we do. Again, when you're planning work, so if you're, say, replacing joinery, you could replace it on a like-for-like basis and replace single glazed windows with single glazed windows. However, we recommend considering environmental benefits and upgrades. So if you're replacing single glazed windows, why not do it with double glazed or triple glazed? And again, having a planned approach to maintenance means that you can consider all of these factors ahead of time. We can advise you on the cost of single glazed windows, and we can advise you on the uplift cost of triple glaze 3, 4, 5 years in advance. So you can make those decisions in good time and get the benefits of having a more environmentally friendly, lower energy usage building. The final one is interruption to buildings use. At the end of the day, we all want to be able to use our buildings in the way that they're intended, whether that is as a home or as a business. And if a building element fails when you're not expecting it, it will most likely interrupt how you're using it. That might mean people having to rehome for a period of time while a roof is replaced, or it might mean businesses being unable to operate. And then there's a question of whether these kind of things are covered by insurance or not, and it all becomes very messy. So again, planning your maintenance and being able to undertake the works before they're needed means that you avoid those business or operational interruptions. So on to the key elements of an LTMP. As I said at the start of the webinar, we have this main table which shows the costs on it. Now, one of the key features of that is price escalation or inflation. When we're forecasting over 30 years, this is obviously a really relevant part in terms of setting budgets. Now, we're not accountants, so forecasting the inflation rate over a 30-year period isn't within our skill set. But as I say, it's important that it is in there so that the levies are recovering sufficient funds for works taking place in the long term. So we will work with you as our clients to put a figure in that's relevant for inflation, but I just wanted to show the impact of getting that number right. As we've got on the screen, as of March this year, the inflation figure in New Zealand was 6.7%, which as we know is very high. So the impact of applying that over a 30-year period to a piece of work that is, say, $1 million, which might be a roof replacement, something that's $1 million today, at 6.7% in 30 years, that would be $6.558 million, which is obviously a huge increase. Again, showing the value of planning this so that you've collected the right funds for that work. However, if you put in 4% as your inflation figure, which is the average inflation in New Zealand over the last 30 years, that figure of 1 million becomes 3.118 in 30 years' time. So that's less than half. And that's clearly going to have a significant impact on the funds that you are accumulating. So getting that inflation figure right, which like I say isn't our area of expertise but is as important as anything else we're saying, is critical to making sure your levy numbers are set correctly. So once we've done that cost element of the report and we've got the table with the element by element basis and the costs for the items of work on every year, we then look at the analysis, and this is where we really start to add value. The chart on the screen there is what you get as an output, and that is the total cost of work on a year-by-year basis. So this example that I've got shown here is for a new build. So in a new build property, and this is about 150 unit body corporate, on a new build property, if you just bought into that, you would not expect there to be significant maintenance works for the first 15 years, I guess, if we go back to that B2 durability requirement. A minimum 15 years before you really start having to spend a lot of money on things. Yes, there might be some decoration in the short term and those kind of things just to keep it ticking over. But as this chart shows, $1 million on this side. So there's a big spike in year 19 where there's $5 million worth of work to be undertaken. So that is very typical of a building of this type and this age. So as a body corporate, you're not going to be wanting to contribute levies of any particular amount for the first 15, maybe 20 years of the plan. And then you've got a spike at year 29 as well. So all of that means that there is a large amount of money to be spent over the 30-year cycle. But what we need to do is make sure that the people that own the properties now aren't contributing $5,000, $10,000 per unit each year when the works aren't going to take place for a long time, because that's just going to put people off. It's going to make the properties harder to sell and generally make people unhappy and less likely to buy into the long-term maintenance process. So we've developed an algorithm within our report which looks at what we call budget cycles, and that enables you as body corporate managers, body corporate committees, to look at the impact of these budget cycles on the levy, taking into consideration the works that need to be done. So the black line on there is the levy with the axis on the right hand side, and this is a 7-year budget cycle. So what it's showing here is that for the first kind of 10, 12 years, the levy is low. It's below $1,000 per unit, which is good in terms of what I described before. But then it does kick up, and it goes very quickly up to over 5, and then again it goes up to over 6, and then it goes up to over 8. So those people further down in kind of 20, 25 years time are having to pay a lot more. Now, they probably would expect to be paying more because by that time the building is 15, 20 years old. However, they might not be happy with the fact that it's gone from $1,000 per unit to over $5,000 in the space of a year. So then we can look at other budget cycles. And this one is a 10-year budget cycle. So again, starts off low, below $1,000. It kicks up again, but it doesn't go so high. It goes up to kind of 4.5, and then tops out at just over 6. So that's a lot better in terms of what the highest contribution per unit is. So 10-year budget period is looking pretty good. And then we can look at a 30-year one. So 30-year one is looking good at the back end because there's some big pieces of work to be undertaken, but the levy is actually dropping off. However, at the front end, we're over $2,500 per unit, which may not be palatable for the people owning the property at the moment. Basically, what I'm trying to describe here is that there isn't a correct answer. We work with you as our clients to come to the answer that suits you best. The cost of work there is fixed, really. That's our advice as surveyors. We're then analysing that and adapting that to suit what you need. And obviously, a lot of people are going to want to keep the levy as low as possible in the short term. That's not always possible. So this example here is what we call a bow wave. And this is an existing property that hasn't had any kind of proactive maintenance, and in fact not really had much maintenance at all. So what you find is that at the start of the schedule there's some big spikes in cost. There's $2 million, nearly $3 million worth of work in 2 consecutive years, which means that the body corporate there's probably got a bit of a problem because they've got to find the money when they don't have it in the bank, and they're going to have some really high levies. So what we would do in this situation is work with the body corporate to see what we can do with these spikes and whether we can delay that work. And again, we're using our professional expertise there to prioritise works and say, right, our initial review suggests that you're going to need a new roof in the next 2 or 3 years, but what can we do maybe to extend the life of that? We might be taking a slight risk, spend a bit of money, delay that new roof until maybe year 6 or 7 or something, while you can accumulate the funds to be able to pay for that work. And that's really where we're trying to add that value and make sure that what we give you is usable and not just give you a problem and let you sail away and try and solve it. And unfortunately and inevitably, when we do that, the long-term maintenance plan just goes in a pile labelled too hard to deal with, and the body corporate just reverts to a reactive process which doesn't do anyone any favours. So, in terms of summarising then, we're chartered and registered building surveyors at Prendos, both building surveyors and quantity surveyors. So the technical advice and the cost advice we give you is highly professional and we believe the best in the market. We also tick the box of the UTA amendment, which says it needs to be provided by building professionals, which we are. What we're also really interested in is tailoring our reports to your requirements, making sure that what we give you is usable going forward and when we actually pass it to you. We add value through the expertise that we have in terms of interpreting our reports and making sure that you as non-professionals understand what we're telling you and help you take that information and actually do something with it. And we can be retained on an ongoing basis to help you deliver these plans, not just on the 3-yearly review cycle, but actually how do we take this information that you've been given and actually do something to the benefit of the building. And finally, for body corporate managers, we can offer an economy of scale on multiple instructions. So if you've got a large number of sites that you want us to look at, we can talk to you about that and give some value to your clients. So that brings me to the end of the webinar, and I really hope you've enjoyed it. And as I said at the beginning, if you've got any questions for us, please do get in contact. And if you've got anything you want us to look at as well, we'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much.